Seed of Life is a game developed by a two-man team. With that in mind, my expectations were very low. I got the game on its release date and completely forgot to check if ultra-wide is supported. And of course, as luck would have it, it was not. Because of this, the recording is in 1080p instead of 21:9, and weirdly enough, they actually released a patch for 21:9 support days after I finished the game, so it was already too late for me, but if you are going to play the game, you will probably have that option. Sadly, the developer released a statement that they just can't get 32:9 to work, so there will be no patch for that. With the aspect ratio portion of the review out of the way, I want to quickly mention that there were a few other issues with the game which were apparently addressed already with some of the patches. I will focus on that when I address the specific issue at hand. First, let's start with the game's story. We control Cora, who lives on a strange planet. Apparently her planet is slowly dying and the only thing that can save it are the Seeds of Life, which need to be activated, by the way. Unfortunately, as the planet deteriorates, more and more hazards manifest themselves, making this quest far more dangerous than it sounds. Luckily, Cora encounters a friendly alien at the start of the game who helps her unlock some useful abilities by giving her a special talisman. You may have noticed that the game has some pretty environments. While the map feels relatively open, it's actually not very big. Our first skill gives Cora the ability to see things that would normally remain invisible to her and thus interact with them. The game teaches us that using the special abilities will cost us Lumium, a resource which we can gather by interacting with the many Lumium plants spread all over the map. The good thing here is that each plant will also boost our Lumium capacity whenever we first interact with it. This is also a good reason for us to actually explore the map more thoroughly rather than just go for the objectives. More Lumium means longer uninterrupted use of our skills, which in turn makes the game more fun. However, you need to first unlock these skills by finding them before you can actually put them to good use. This is where I have to address the game's difficulty. Seed of Life calls itself an adventure game, but the truth is that it's a 3D platformer above all. So a big part of the game will involve you jumping from one platform to another. In some cases, your decision making will have to be fast since those platforms will break below you after a few seconds. This is also one of the game's main sources of frustration for the player. The other one is that it doesn't explain enough. There's barely any hand holding here, particularly at the start while the player is still trying to figure things out and hasn't found most of the abilities yet. I did mention that the game's maps are not very large. That gave me the false confidence that exploring everything would neither take long nor be too difficult. I was of course wrong. One of the ways the map is larger than you thought will be because of the fact that it uses verticality, so you will have to go up and down a lot. In addition to that, one of the first powers you have to find is the healing one. The problem here is that you are supposed to look for it in a zone which drains our character's health as time goes on. This sucks because the game gives you rough directions to several possible points of interest, only one of which contains the healing ability which you so desperately need. And by the way, you're not really certain that this is going to fix the problem at the start. You only realize it once you find it. The game gives you a few very small hints, but all in all, it's not really clear. The consequence of this was that I would explore in one direction and die, then lose all the extra Lumium I had gathered and have to start over from the last checkpoint. Using the system of trial and error, I was once able to stumble across the correct path and acquire the ability I so desperately needed. From that point on, exploring becomes a lot more bearable since the healing ability can overheal the constant damage you take from the environment. The problem with this is that most players could get frustrated and might even give up right at the start of the game. And that would be a shame because it does get better and much more enjoyable. This is where I want to address the fact that a recent update actually fixed this to some extent. Now all the Lumium plants will provide a shield for the player. While this feels as though the devs have fixed a major issue, I see problems with it as well. When the fix was not there, the player would inevitably die if they were on the wrong path. This means that through death, they could recognize that the game wants them to go somewhere else. Now it's easier to survive, which could cause more confusion among the players. This is also where I would like to address our protagonist Cora. She is fully voice acted and I really appreciate this. Normally, indie games made with such a limited budget will just have some written text, which completely kills the vibe for me. I've seen that people are not happy with Cora's voice actress, but I disagree with them. Yes, she does sound a bit emotionless, but if you ask me, this actually fits with the story. She has spent her whole life living on a dying planet with only her grandfather to take care of her. It seems perfectly fitting that she would sound exhausted and broken. In my opinion, the voice acting here is perfectly fitting and definitely makes the game a lot more enjoyable. Cora's model is also fairly nice. Her movements look and feel quite good considering the fact that there is no motion capture used here. So ultimately I'm pretty happy with our protagonist. The one thing that did annoy me was that whenever Cora decides to speak, she starts walking slowly and will be unable to interact with objects until the dialogue ends. This is particularly annoying since I would love to gather some lumium from the plants around me while listening to the dialogue, but I can't and have to therefore stop and wait. I have also encountered a strange bug where my character could no longer interact with anything around her. In this particular example, I should be able to climb those vines, and in fact, I did just a few minutes earlier, but suddenly that's no longer possible. I couldn't interact with the lumium plants either. So this kind of gave me a hint that something's wrong. This bug happened only once during my 5-hour playthrough and was resolved by restarting the game. The devs actually claim to have fixed it with a recent update, so it's possible that new players will never encounter it, but I did, so I have to mention it. Remember when I said that this game is a platformer above all? Effectively, the game wants you to find various abilities and use them in order to reach and activate the seeds of life. One of the obstacles in your way will be special shield walls, which usually require you to find a device and interact with it. Cora will then extract a petal from it, causing the shield which was blocking you to disappear. My first complaint here is that some of these shield walls can simply be circumvented by performing some very simple platforming. I'm actually pretty sure that there were several instances where I avoided such walls in ways that the game didn't really plan for. But it still worked for me, so I just continued. It's really hard for me to tell if the developers knew about this and intentionally implemented it in order to give players more freedom, or if it's just an oversight. But since each of these devices, which you would deactivate, gives you a petal, and deactivating every single shield wall ends up giving you a lot more petals than you actually need to progress in the game, I want to believe that the developers planned for this and intentionally allowed the players to avoid some of the walls with clever platforming. And since I've mentioned the use of petals, this is where they are actually required. You find these strange structures, insert the required amount of petals, solve a simple puzzle, and in return receive a new ability. Now to the main course, the platforming. I played this game using my keyboard and mouse, and the platforming felt really good. Cora controls very well and is responsive. The player has a good feeling for when she will land after a jump is made, and can even correct any mistakes in midair to some degree. This makes the platforming challenging but fair, which is extremely important in such a game. Cora gets to unlock a sprint ability not long after the game starts. With its help, she can cover vast distances with each jump, which ends up giving the player a lot more options. Once you get comfortable with how it controls, you end up doing more daring stunts, which again feel like you are cheesing the game by taking shortcuts. In this instance, I'm pretty confident that the developers simply planned ahead and intentionally placed the platforms closer to each other in order to give players who find such games harder a better chance, while the more confident ones can simply skip several platforms with each jump and feel like a badass while doing it. Then there's one more thing we have to consider, and that is the enemy design. For the most part, the most dangerous part of the levels will be the hazards that you have to avoid. But there will be these little blue aliens who will try to latch onto Cora and suck her life essence. Luckily, the talisman which you receive at the start of the game will help you repel them once they've latched on, but this only works if you have some lumium left. Should you be out of it, I'm afraid to say that there is no escape from their deadly embrace. All in all, the blue aliens are quite annoying, but luckily only appear a few times within the game. With the exception of the first area, the other sections where you encounter them are easily avoided unless you wish to explore for some extra lumium. Then things could get more difficult. The game also offers you the option of sacrificing some of your lumium capacity in return for more health, but that's a terrible idea and absolutely not worth it in my opinion. I did it a few times and ended up regretting that choice. An important thing to consider is that backtracking is rewarded in this game. Some areas only become accessible once you have specific skills or high enough lumium capacity. The ability to sprint makes you so fast that backtracking is not even annoying, so I was happy to do it. Lastly, I want to mention that I got stuck while walking on a path which is clearly the intended way. That was really strange and caused me to panic since my character was just in front of the objective when it happened, and I was afraid I would have to restart the game from the last checkpoint, which was not very close in this case. Luckily, I was able to free myself after some time, but it still ended up scaring me a bit. At the end of the day, Seed of Life turned out to be much better than I expected. The graphics are really nice, the two-man development team respond really quickly to feedback and have been working actively on making the game better and fixing its problems. It's rare to see so many fixes implemented so quickly. With that being said, I have to make it clear that this game is not for everyone. It has some pretty steep difficulty spikes and does not hold your hand. Funny enough, the game shows you several loading screens as you traverse its world, and on each of them there are hints. And usually we are used to ignore such hints. We see them all the time, they're always very mundane, most of the time there might be a joke in there, but it's not something that you need to complete the game. And while that is true to some extent here as well, it is something that actually helped me figure out where I was failing. One of those hints reminded me that if I am failing somewhere, it might be smart to activate the vision ability, which lets me see things that aren't there, and that might actually help me solve the problem. In one particular instance, I had to make a few jumps between platforms, but the last platforms seemed to be too far apart. However, since they were moving and there were so many, I just felt like I wasn't doing it right. Luckily, each death actually triggers a loading screen, and each loading screen comes with some hints, and there I saw the one that I just mentioned. I simply hadn't considered the fact that the game would want me to switch skills or activate additional abilities while jumping between crumbling platforms. It's not like it's hard to do. I just didn't expect it because the game didn't teach me through its gameplay that visible platforms can also be combined with invisible ones. Up until that point, it had always been one or the other. So I spent the next 20 minutes trying to figure out why I can't handle some jumps. And while it was clearly my fault for not realizing that I had to combine my sprint and sight abilities, it could cause some people to get overly frustrated and abandon the game again, thinking that it's too hard. I feel like, looking back, I have to wonder if my problem-solving skills have suffered due to all the hand-holding that I've seen from other games, and now I tend to expect every other game to do the same thing. So, if you find yourself on the lookout for a 3D platformer with really nice graphics, a somewhat boring story and fluctuating gameplay difficulty, look no further. For me, Seed of Life was very enjoyable. For someone like my wife who hates platformers with a passion, this game would be a modern form of torture. So make sure you are aware of the fact that this is a platformer first and foremost. I hope this review has helped you make up your mind. The game is not very popular, but I feel like the devs deserve more exposure and recognition for the good work they have done here. It's definitely a very good first step, if you ask me. With that having been said, I want to thank you for watching Game Filter. I'll hopefully see you again on the next one, but until then, have a great day.